Medicine Hat, Alberta, a quiet town in Canada where people left their doors unlocked and neighbors still waved to one another from their driveways. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find horror, at least not the kind that would shatter the illusion of safety, not the kind that would leave a whole family butchered in their own home. But that's exactly what happened in the spring of 2006. April 23rd began like any other Sunday. Birds chirped, lawns were watered. The morning calm in the suburban cul-de-sac of 306th Street Southeast carried no sign of the nightmare hidden behind one modest home's closed front door. But soon, the peace would be ripped apart. A neighbor, curious after not seeing the family all morning, knocked on the Richardsons' door. No answer. Then they peeked through a window. What they saw inside froze them in place. A man, bloody, motionless, slumped at the bottom of the staircase. Mark Richardson, the father. It looked like he had been attacked brutally. Something was horribly wrong. Authorities were immediately called, and within minutes, yellow tape was up, neighbors were pushed back, and the town's tranquility crumbled under the weight of sirens. When police entered the home, the scene was unimaginable. Upstairs, Deborah Richardson lay lifeless in a pool of blood. Nearby, the body of 8-year-old Jacob, the youngest in the family, was found in his bed, slashed, stabbed. It didn't look like a robbery. There was no forced entry, no valuables missing. This was something else, something colder, more personal. But there was something even more unsettling. One family member was missing. 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson, Mark and Deborah's daughter, was nowhere to be found. Her room looked undisturbed, no sign of struggle, no forced abduction. That absence turned the murder case into something more complicated. Was she kidnapped? Had she escaped the carnage? Or was something far more sinister at play? As word of the triple homicide spread across Alberta, so did fear. The idea that someone, or multiple people, could enter a family's home and slaughter them in cold blood shook the community. People triple-checked their locks. They kept their kids close. The Richardsons had seemed like a normal, loving family. Mark was a devoted father. Deborah worked hard to raise her children right, and Jacob, he was just a little boy, full of life. No one could fathom who would want them dead. Investigators began working tirelessly. But their biggest question wasn't who committed the murders, at least not yet. It was, where is Jasmine? Within hours, an Amber Alert was considered, but something didn't quite fit. There were no signs of a break-in. And then came the chilling twist. As authorities started digging into Jasmine's world, her friends, her online activity, her school life, what they uncovered sent a cold wave through the entire investigative team. Jasmine was living a double life. Online, she was part of underground goth communities, immersed in dark fantasy role-playing, often describing herself as older than she really was. In fact, on some sites, she claimed to be 15 or even 18. That's how she met Jeremy Steinke, a 23-year-old man who claimed he was a 300-year-old werewolf. Yes, a werewolf. He wore a vial of blood around his neck and bragged about drinking it. He was obsessed with death, pain, and horror. And he was dating Jasmine, a 12-year-old girl. Her parents, as any sane parents would, were horrified when they found out. They forbade the relationship. They grounded her. They tried to save their daughter from a man they saw as predatory and dangerous. But it was already too late. Behind their backs, Jasmine and Jeremy's connection only deepened. They communicated online in disturbing messages filled with violent fantasies and coded threats. To them, the world didn't understand their love, and Mark and Deborah in particular were the enemy. One of the messages investigators recovered read, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you, Jeremy." As the truth began to surface, a horrifying possibility emerged. What if Jasmine wasn't kidnapped at all? What if she helped plan it? And then the call came in. A tip from a town 120 kilometers away, Leader, Saskatchewan. A couple matching Jeremy and Jasmine's descriptions had been spotted at a truck stop, laughing, kissing, behaving like lovers on the run. Not a pair in mourning, not victims, fugitives. Police quickly moved in. They were found in a pickup truck parked behind the establishment. Inside, they were hiding under blankets, whispering sweet nothings. And just like that, the final piece of the grotesque puzzle began to fall into place. 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson wasn't missing. She was accomplice to the murders of her own family. Let that settle in. A child, a daughter, an older sister. She had conspired with her much older boyfriend to wipe out her entire bloodline, and now that dark truth was spreading like wildfire. In schoolyards, in newsrooms, in courtrooms. Canada had never seen anything like this. The public was outraged, terrified, and stunned by the coldness of it all. How did a child, not even a teenager, turn into a killer? What drove her into the arms of a man twice her age and into a plot soaked in blood? This is The Untold Trace, and I am your host. If you're new here, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life horror stories that leave no stone unturned. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history, a crime born not of impulse, but of obsession, fantasy, and betrayal. Because what happened in that house was not random. It was planned, meticulously.
As officers pulled Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke from the pickup truck in the small town of Leader, Saskatchewan, the atmosphere was tense, eerie. This wasn't a scene of frightened fugitives surrendering to justice. No fear, no regret. Just calm, cold. Jasmine, barely over 4 feet tall, stepped out with the kind of detachment you'd expect from someone running away from a broken curfew, not someone accused of conspiring to murder her family in cold blood. Jeremy, in his mid-20s, clad in black and draped in chains with eyeliner smudged under his eyes, acted more like a character from a low-budget horror film than a real man accused of mass murder. As police handcuffed him, he reportedly laughed and muttered one sentence: "You won't separate us. Our love is eternal." It would be easy to dismiss Jeremy as a delusional goth romantic, a man lost in fantasy. But the reality was far more sinister. In the coming weeks, investigators would uncover a trail of online messages, diary entries, and conversations that painted a haunting picture. These murders weren't the result of a moment of madness. They were premeditated, coordinated, and disturbingly romanticized. Back in Medicine Hat, the town was still reeling. News of Jasmine's arrest hadn't just shocked the community, it had shattered something much deeper. A 12-year-old helping to orchestrate the slaughter of her own parents and younger brother? It didn't seem real. Teachers, classmates, and neighbors couldn't believe it. Many described Jasmine as polite, smart, and even shy. She was a bright student. She smiled often. She played with Jacob in the backyard. Her transformation from schoolgirl to killer seemed unfathomable. But the internet told a different story. Jasmine had constructed an entire alternate identity online. She frequented a site called vampirefreaks.com where she went by the username Runaway Devil. There, she shared morbid poetry, photos of herself in gothic makeup, and thoughts that revealed a dark and rebellious side hidden beneath her innocent appearance. Her profile stated she was 15. In reality, she had just turned 12. It was on that very site where she met Jeremy Steinke, a man obsessed with vampirism, pain, and violent revenge. Jeremy wasn't just some troubled loner. He was unstable. Diagnosed with depression and borderline personality disorder, he had a history of self-harm and delusions, claiming he was a 300-year-old werewolf who needed to consume blood to survive. In Jasmine, he didn't just find a girlfriend. He found a mirror. The two began exchanging messages, flirtations, quickly turning into violent fantasies. Police found hundreds of notes passed between them, detailing their hatred of Jasmine's parents, their plans to escape together, and their willingness to kill anyone who stood in the way of their love. In one chilling message, Jeremy wrote, "Payment. My lover's rents are totally unfair. They say they really care. They don't know what's going on, they just assume. Her parents are totally unfair. They say they really care. They don't know what's going on. They just assume. Their throats I want to slit." But the most haunting evidence came from Jasmine herself. In her diary, she wrote about a future with Jeremy, running away, getting married, and living happily ever after. But those dreams were always laced with death. In one entry she wrote, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." By April 2006, the plan was in motion. On the night of April 22nd, Jeremy slipped into the Richardson home through the basement window. Jasmine distracted her little brother upstairs. Jeremy encountered Mark Richardson first. A violent struggle broke out in the basement, but Jeremy, armed with a knife, stabbed Mark repeatedly before finishing him off at the foot of the stairs. Deborah, hearing the chaos, rushed downstairs and was met with the same brutal fate. Upstairs, Jasmine turned her attention to her younger brother, 8-year-old Jacob. What happened next was unspeakable. According to court testimony, Jacob pleaded for his life. He begged, "I'm too young to die." But Jasmine, by her own later admission, held him down while Jeremy stabbed him, Some reports suggest Jasmine may have delivered the final blow herself. A child killing her sibling, her own flesh and blood. It wasn't just shocking, it was apocalyptic in its emotional weight. Investigators struggled to process the level of premeditation. This wasn't an impulsive act. The couple had gone to a movie with friends earlier that evening. They laughed, shared popcorn, and then, after pretending everything was normal, went home and murdered 3 people. The level of delusion, of fantasy blending with reality, seemed to go beyond the typical Romeo and Juliet syndrome. This wasn't about forbidden love. This was about entitlement, power, rebellion, a desire to become legends in their own twisted world. At their initial court appearances, the public reaction was nuclear. Protesters lined the courthouse. Reporters flooded the scene. But what struck everyone most was Jasmine's expressionless face. She never cried. She never begged for forgiveness. When asked if she understood the charges against her, she simply nodded. Jeremy, however, was more performative. He boasted about the killings to fellow inmates in holding cells. He claimed responsibility with pride. He referred to Jasmine as his soulmate and said he'd do it all again just to be with her. But fate had other plans. While both were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, Canadian law had a limit. Jasmine, being only 12, could not be tried as an adult under the Youth Justice Act. The maximum sentence for a minor? 10 years. Yes, 10. For the premeditated murder of her own family. Jeremy, on the other hand, was 23 and faced the full weight of the legal system. His trial was still ahead. But the question on everyone's mind remained. Was Jasmine a victim of manipulation? Or had she fully embraced the darkness? We'll dive deeper into the trial, the psychology, and the haunting aftermath in the next part of this documentary. But first, if this story is chilling you to the bone, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to The Untold Trace for more real horror stories pulled from the shadows of our world. Because in Medicine Hat, Alberta, innocence didn't just die. It was buried under blood and betrayal.
The courtroom in Medicine Hat was not built to carry the weight of a case like this. As spectators filled the gallery, the air felt thick, like the walls themselves recoiled from what they were about to witness. On one side sat Jeremy Steinke, the self-styled werewolf with a vacant smile and dead eyes. On the other sat Jasmine Richardson, barely a teenager, her small frame swallowed by courtroom furniture, as though the proceedings were too adult, too large for someone her age. But make no mistake, Jasmine was not innocent. Not in spirit, not in intent. And now the world was about to watch justice attempt to untangle the threads of manipulation, fantasy, and murder that left an entire family buried and a nation stunned. The trial of Jasmine Richardson began behind closed doors. Because of her age, just 12 years old at the time of the crime, Canadian law required her trial to be protected from full public exposure. Reporters were banned, cameras were absent, but the details that leaked from within were enough to keep the country in a collective gasp. Prosecutors didn't hesitate. They laid out their case with chilling clarity. Jasmine had not only plotted with Jeremy to kill her family, she had embraced it. Fully, willingly. They revealed diary entries, online chats, and hand-scrawled notes that painted her not as a coerced girl under an older man's spell, but as an active participant and willing architect of annihilation. One chat message read, "Their throats I want to slit. They will regret the shit they've done, especially when I see to it that they are gone." And then, perhaps most horrifying of all, came her response to Jacob's final moments. Jasmine was confronted with the fact that her 8-year-old brother had begged for his life, that he had looked her in the eyes and said, "I'm scared. I don't want to die." The prosecutor's voice cracked slightly as they read those words aloud. And Jasmine? She didn't flinch. Witnesses testified to her disturbing composure. Even during graphic testimony, photos of the crime scene, autopsy details, desperate 911 calls, she showed little emotion. It was as if she had separated herself from reality, as if the murder of her family was not an act of brutality, but a necessary chapter in her teen romance. Jeremy's trial would be separate, but his shadow loomed over Jasmine's proceedings. The defense argued that she had been manipulated, that Jeremy was an older man who preyed on her youthful vulnerabilities, that he groomed her online, fed her tales of undying love, and twisted her mind into thinking that murder was the only way for them to be together. To some, that narrative held weight. After all, Jasmine was 12, barely in middle school. She had no criminal record, no violent behavior, no signs of severe mental illness. Her descent into darkness had been rapid and laser-focused around Jeremy. But others weren't so convinced, because while Jeremy's influence was undeniable, the evidence showed that Jasmine had not been a passive bystander. She didn't just agree with the plan, she participated in its orchestration. She selected the time. She played her part. She led her little brother to his death. That level of involvement, many argued, went far beyond manipulation. It spoke to something else entirely, something colder. And as the trial progressed, Jasmine's own words only deepened that perception. In her taped confession, played for the jury, she described the night of the murders in unnerving detail. Her tone? Calm, almost clinical. "I loved my parents, but they wouldn't let me be with Jeremy. They thought he was bad for me. So we figured if they were gone, we could be together." As if wiping out her entire family was just a speed bump in her teen romance. When asked about Jacob, she paused for a moment, then said, "It had to be done. He would have been put in foster care." Not, "He was my little brother." Not, "I regret it." Just, "It had to be done." The public, already horrified, now turned furious. To many, it felt like Jasmine wasn't remorseful at all, just inconvenienced that her dream life with Jeremy had ended in police lights rather than a fairy tale elopement. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came in: guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. But here's where the case became even more controversial. Under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, Jasmine couldn't be sentenced like an adult. The maximum sentence, no matter how heinous the crime, was 10 years. 10 years for helping to slaughter her parents and brother in cold blood. That included time in custody, followed by community supervision. And so, at just 13 years old, Jasmine became one of the youngest convicted killers in Canadian history. Meanwhile, Jeremy Steinke's trial loomed. Unlike Jasmine, Jeremy faced the full wrath of adult sentencing. He pled not guilty, but prosecutors dismantled his defense. They showed messages, heard testimony from inmates to whom he'd bragged about the killings, and exposed his obsession with the film Natural-Born Killers, a twisted love story about 2 psychopaths who go on a killing spree. He wasn't ashamed. He was proud. In a disturbing jailhouse interview, Jeremy said, "I did what I had to do to be with her. We were meant to be. I'd do it again." Eventually, he was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 3 life terms with no possibility of parole for 25 years. During his sentencing, the judge called his actions horrific, senseless, and cold-blooded. In the courtroom, a survivor of Deborah Richardson's family wept quietly. She whispered, "They died for nothing." Outside the courthouse, the town of Medicine Hat tried to reclaim its peace. But how do you heal from something like this? How does a community rebuild when the monster didn't come from outside, but from within? And what of Jasmine? She began serving her sentence in a psychiatric facility tailored for young offenders. Her therapy included counseling, education, and eventually supervised reintegration into society. By the age of 23, she had completed her sentence. Free, anonymous, protected by law. Her name changed, her past sealed. Yes, you heard that right. Jasmine Richardson was released back into society. The child who conspired to destroy her family, who held down her little brother as he begged for his life, now walks free. No criminal record, no legal obligation to tell anyone who she once was. How does that sit with you? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who thinks suburban peace is bulletproof, because sometimes the most dangerous darkness doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those sleeping just down the hall.
Long after the court doors closed and the verdicts were read, the shadows of the Richardson family murders continued to stretch across Canada, especially in the quiet town of Medicine Hat. The air there never quite returned to normal. Behind every neighbor's smile was a flicker of suspicion. Behind every locked door, a whispered question. How did this happen? And could it ever happen again? Jeremy Steinke sat in his cell, now a convicted triple murderer. No parole for 25 years. The courtroom was behind him, but his twisted persona lived on, especially in the chilling interviews and letters that would surface in the years to come. He seemed to revel in the infamy. He wasn't just unapologetic,
He was defiant. In his mind, he wasn't a killer. He was a romantic martyr. In one recorded jailhouse interview, Jeremy smirked as he described the murders. "It was our love story. That's what nobody gets. We were going to run off, start a new life. Her parents just got in the way." He spoke like a man who thought he was the hero of a horror novel. Not once did he speak of Jacob. Not once did he acknowledge the terror in that little boy's voice before the knife fell. His words weren't just delusional, they were cruel. And then came something even more disturbing. Jeremy wanted to marry Jasmine. Yes, while in custody, after the murders, he proposed. And Jasmine? She said yes. Their twisted love story, it seemed, wasn't over, at least not in their eyes. But thankfully, the justice system said otherwise. The marriage was blocked. The public was outraged. Politicians and legal experts debated how such a request could even be entertained. This case was no longer just about crime. It had become a cultural wound, raising questions no one wanted to answer. What do we do with children who kill? Can someone so young truly understand the gravity of their actions? And when they serve their time, should we ever let them go free? Jasmine's rehabilitation began the moment she was taken into custody. Under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, the Canadian system's approach to juvenile crime isn't focused on punishment, it's centered on rehabilitation. The theory is simple. Young minds can change, children can grow. The system believes that a child who kills isn't the same person at 22 that they were at 12. And so Jasmine was placed in a psychiatric facility. She received education, therapy, behavioral evaluations. Reports from professionals over the years described her as intelligent, insightful, and eventually remorseful. Some said she cried often in therapy sessions, that she took responsibility, that she expressed deep guilt for what she had done. But others weren't convinced, because remorse in private doesn't erase the past, and the public wanted accountability, real, visible remorse, not just legal rehabilitation, but a moral reckoning. And here's the part that still keeps people awake at night. Jasmine Richardson completed her sentence in 2016. She walked free at the age of 23 with a new identity, a sealed record, and the legal right to anonymity. No criminal history would follow her, no notification to employers, no requirement to ever tell anyone who she really was. For the rest of her life, she would simply be another face in the crowd. To the law, her bet was paid. But to the public, justice felt undone. Imagine that. You meet someone at work. She's quiet, polite, kind. She says she grew up in the prairie provinces, moved around a bit. Seems nice. A little mysterious maybe, but aren't we all? You sit across from her at lunch. You talk about family. And you don't know, you'll never know, that you're looking into the eyes of someone who helped murder her parents and stabbed her baby brother. This isn't fiction. This is real life. And it's happening right now. That reality divided Canadians. Some applauded the justice system for holding true to its philosophy, rehabilitate, don't ruin lives. Others demanded legal reform, arguing that crimes of this scale, even when committed by minors, should carry lifelong consequences. Across newsrooms and dinner tables, the debate raged on. Should Jasmine's record remain sealed? Should the public have the right to know? Or was she truly reformed? Psychologists who worked with her testified that she had matured, grown, and rejected her past actions. She had dreams now, a desire for a normal life, possibly children, a future, and according to the system, she had earned it. But let's not forget who didn't get a future. Mark Richardson, Deborah Richardson, Jacob Richardson, just 8 years old. No high school graduation, no first kiss, no family dinners, no life. 3 people buried because a child decided they were in the way. The final emotional dagger came during Jeremy's 2012 appeal attempt. He tried to argue that he had been unfairly portrayed, that the sentence was too harsh. The court rejected his plea, but during the appeal, he made one last public statement. He said, "If I could go back, I'd do it all over again, only faster." The courtroom fell silent. It was a moment that clarified everything. This wasn't a misunderstood couple. This was evil, raw, chilling, and unrepentant. Jeremy would rot in prison. But Jasmine? Jasmine had chosen to step out of the darkness. Whether she truly left it behind, no one will really ever know. Today, she walks among us. She could be your coworker, your neighbor, the person handing you your coffee. And because of the law, you'll never be told. You're not allowed to know. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. If a child can kill and be set free, what does that say about justice, about forgiveness, about safety? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Should Jasmine's name have been protected? Do you believe she's truly changed? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who thinks the past always stays buried. Because here, at The Untold Trace, we don't let nightmares fade. We dig them up. We trace them back. And we tell them out loud.
Medicine Hat used to be a name no one knew. A quiet dot on the Canadian map where neighbors waved at each other. Kids played freely in cul-de-sacs, and crimes were measured in shoplifting and speeding tickets. But after April 2006, that name would be etched into history. Not for its charm, not for its scenery, but for housing one of the most disturbing family murders the country had ever seen. Even after the trials ended and the news cameras moved on, the town itself never quite recovered. The Richardson home on 6th Street Southeast sat abandoned for years. Its walls, once lined with family portraits and children's drawings, had soaked up blood, grief, and horror. It was a house no one wanted, a structure with a heartbeat, pulsing with memory. Eventually, the city demolished it, razed it to the ground like a haunted relic they wanted to forget. But tearing down the house didn't erase the story. Because the ghosts weren't just in the bricks, they were in the minds of everyone who lived there. Schools became a little stricter, parents became a little more cautious. People talked about the case in hushed tones, like mentioning Jasmine's name might bring back the darkness. But no one forgot. How could they? This wasn't a monster from outside. It was a 12-year-old girl, a local child, someone who had sat in their classrooms, laughed in their cafeterias, and then helped orchestrate a massacre. The story of the Richardson family murders didn't just change one town. It forced a nation to confront its deepest fears about youth, morality, and justice. Can a child be evil? It's a question no one wants to ask because the answer requires us to break the illusions we hold about childhood innocence. But this case forced that conversation, and it sparked others too, about digital culture, online grooming, mental health, and the limits of juvenile justice. In the wake of the crime, debates flared across Canada. Some called for harsher sentences for youth charged with violent crimes. Others defended the current system, insisting that children, no matter how horrendous their actions, are still developing minds, capable of change. The Richardson case became a lightning rod. Law professors debated it in classrooms. Politicians referenced it in speeches. Citizens wrote letters to Parliament demanding reform. But there was no easy answer. Because Jasmine Richardson didn't fit the mold of a psychopath. She wasn't born in violence. She wasn't abused. She wasn't struggling to survive. She came from a stable middle-class home with parents who loved her. They weren't perfect, no one is. But they had rules, boundaries, and expectations. And that was apparently enough to mark them for death. It wasn't survival. It wasn't desperation. It was revenge. Cold, premeditated revenge against authority, against restriction, against being told no. And when Jeremy Steinke entered the picture, that rebellion found form, direction, teeth. The internet became their tool. In online chat rooms and forums, their fantasies grew. They weren't just misunderstood teenagers, they were soulmates trapped in a cruel world. Mark and Deborah were no longer parents, they were the villains, the final boss in a twisted love story. And Jacob? He was just collateral damage. To the world, Jasmine was a child, but to herself, she was Juliet. And in her own warped narrative, Jeremy was her Romeo, except this time, the bloodshed wasn't theirs, it was everyone else's. And now? Jasmine walks free. She was released in 2016 after completing her 10-year sentence, the maximum the law would allow for a youth offender. Her identity is sealed, her records scrubbed. She's believed to be living somewhere in Canada, possibly under a new name, with the full protection of the justice system. Jeremy, meanwhile, is still behind bars. His request to marry Jasmine was denied. He's now known by a different name, Jeremy Roy, and continues to serve his life sentence. He'll be eligible for parole in 2031, though few believe he'll ever be granted freedom. But the wounds they created, those will never be sealed. Mark and Deborah's family members still mourn. They're the ones who sit in silence every April, remembering the phone call, the headlines, the trial, the unbearable realization that their niece, their cousin, their granddaughter was the orchestrator of her own family's execution. And Jacob? Sweet, innocent Jacob. He is often the forgotten name in the case, overshadowed by the spectacle of Jasmine and Jeremy's forbidden love. But Jacob was the true victim. He was 8 years old. He loved cartoons. He slept with the door open. He trusted his sister. He thought monsters lived in closets, not bedrooms. His last words, "I'm too young to die," should haunt us all. Because he was right. He was too young, and he never had a choice. So what can we learn from all this? That evil can wear braces? That murder can be written in diary entries instead of carved into skin? That sometimes the danger isn't lurking outside the home, but growing quietly within it? Yes. And that's why we tell these stories. Not to sensationalize tragedy, not to exploit horror, but to remind ourselves vigilance doesn't mean paranoia. Boundaries don't always guarantee safety, and love, when warped through obsession, can become the most dangerous weapon of all. This was more than just a crime. It was a reckoning. And for the town of Medicine Hat, for the families involved, and for a nation that had to face the truth about its youth, it was a nightmare that proved one thing. Evil has no age limit, and sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table. This has been The Untold Trace, and I'm your host. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or made you think twice about the innocence we assign to age, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to shine a light on the darkest corners of real life, because these are the stories that demand to be remembered. Check out our other videos for more chilling tales of love gone wrong, families torn apart, and crimes that defy explanation. And remember, some nightmares don't live under your bed. Sometimes they sleep down the hall.